Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about job hopping. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, I have a question. Why do you think it is acceptable for the IT industry to change jobs every 2 to 4 years? To me, this just seems right, but to other people with different professions that I talk to, they believe it will hurt my job prospects in the future. Do you have any thoughts? Yes, I do. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a video, now would it? So, my thoughts on this, but let's actually back it up one moment first and say that the reason why this subscriber is stating that the rate of changing jobs is a span of 2 to 4 years is because that is statistically, if you go and look at Stack Overflow's reports, that is statistically how long a developer stays in any one company on average. And that is a fairly high jump rate if you think about it. Now, I have touched on this a few times before, and the motivation behind this job hopping, at least if you ask me, is that I believe that the incentive for you to switch jobs is pretty high as a software developer. First and foremost, your market value is extremely high. There's an enormous amount of companies looking for developers. In fact, there's so many people looking for developers that there's not enough developers to go around. And scarcity, of course, brings up your market value. Now, apart from that, once you have the skills to actually move around and you're pretty much just an asset to the company. This is not always true for the juniors, but for mid-level to senior developers, the companies, they kind of just calculate that if they can get you into the company, it doesn't really matter for the most part that they have to pay recruiters or things like that to get you there, because once you're in, they have a strategy for converting what you do into money pretty much immediately. So it's a frenzy. It's pretty much a free-for-all. Now, what's interesting though is that the subscribers mentioning that, well, for future job prospects this might be bad. Well, there is one scenario where job hopping every 2 to 4 years is going to look bad on your CV, even as a programmer. And that is if you do it frequently to a point where it's kind of weird that you've had tons and tons of jobs that where you don't really seem to have a trend of staying put in any one place. This may damage your the whole, if that makes sense. If I have an eagle eyes perspective by looking at your CV and I see that you don't seem to be faithful to anybody, well, that might make me a little bit concerned as a potential employer. But honestly, I don't really think that that is a very strong argument for you to not do this if you want to, because as I said, the incentive is fairly high. One other aspect to consider here is that as a software developer, there is nothing that you can do in terms of work or talent or anything like that, except for like very few, like we're talking trend-setting developers, that is going to benefit your average salary as much as moving from one job to another. Because whenever you move and you job hop, and I think that this is the other factor that contributes a lot to the reason why developers are moving so much. Because simply put, for you to get a significant pay increase as a software developer, if you're in the same company, that is very hard usually, because it's a lot of work for you to prove that your value to that company is so high that you actually are worth more money. It's a much better position for you in terms of negotiations for a better pay to go to another company. The reason is very simple, because if they are hiring some developers, well, they are in the marketplace for developers. In other words, you can actually haggle over your own value. They don't know your value. They are just going to make an assumption based on the little pieces of information they have about you, which is going to be your CV and how well you can move around in the social environment, right? So if you have soft skills, it's actually going to help your salary most likely. And that's all they have to go on, right? And so they're gonna kind of go with their gut feeling and say, well, all right, this is probably what you are worth. And in many cases, if you argue correctly and you have a little bit of stuff on your CV, you can actually go for that higher pay increase. Now, the reason why this is not the people that the subscriber has talked. The reason why other people may have been saying to the subscriber that this is going to hurt their long-term career, or this person's long-term career, is that in every single profession there is a job culture. Now, if you jump every 2 to 4 years, or maybe even faster than that, that is on average going to look really, really bad for quite a lot of different of professions. And like, just say 20, 30 years ago, it was actually the norm that you stayed in the same company for many, many, many years. That trend is now moving in the other direction, where it's actually very valued and appreciated if a person has had more than a few jobs. The reason is very simple, because if you've only had one single job, well, you better be damn sure that that job that you did in company A is going to be pretty much identical, or that the knowledge that you have acquired in that company is going to transfer to the next company. The more companies you have been employed at, the likelier you are to have picked up on different variants of how to do things. In other words, your experience is actually, in many cases, more appreciated because you have been around, you've seen the world, you understand how things work. You can, of course, acquire this sort of skill and experience in the same company, but it is also a risk factor where you may have been working in a very specific way that doesn't really fit in any other work environment, and now you have become redundant, or like you're irrelevant, and that is not a fun place to be, especially when you get up in the ages. So that's why I believe these people have given the advice that job hopping is bad. But remember, guys, there's quite a lot of other professions where being faithful to a specific company for years and years is not really the norm. If you look at things like the stock market, or sales, or marketing, or things like that, you will notice that that's not a place where people just stay for the rest of their lives. They move about. The same thing goes in management, and the same thing goes in the design, or things like that. Like, there's so many professions where moving around is the norm as opposed to staying in the same job. So what I want you to take away from this is that there might be a sweet spot for how many times you should job hop before it gets a little bit weird. And I would say that you can kind of feel it yourself. If you have like 6, 7, 8 jobs, it's gonna start to notice. Like, you're gonna get, if somebody looks at your CV, it's gonna look a little bit odd. I don't think that you should concern yourself so much about how many jobs you have. I think what's more important for you is to get the job that you want, that you feel happy at. And I can promise you that even if the statistics are saying that moving every 2 and 4 years, or between 2 and 4 years, is the norm, you don't have to be the norm. You can stay in a company that you really enjoy working at. The whole thing comes down to what do you prefer. And in some cases, you're going to be able to stay in a company and feel fulfilled for quite some time. And if you do decide that salary is more important, or like you want to see things and so forth, you have that option most of the time as a software developer. And as I said, nobody's really going to blame you, at least not these days, because the incentive is massive. First thing is, everybody's looking for developers that have the skills, and second part is that is actually the best way for you to fairly quickly increase your overall pay. And for a lot of people, that is reason enough to jump around until they can find the highest payer. Have a great day.